Aria manufacturer branded enemy of Ukraine. Kiev claims Mondelez International is indirectly financing the conflict. One of the world's biggest snack companies, Mondelez International, has been labeled an enemy of Ukraine due to its reluctance to exit Russia, Ukrainian media reported on Thursday. The Ukrainian National Corruption Prevention Agency, NCPA, has designated the producer of Milka and Alpengold chocolate, Aria, and Barney biscuits, picnic bars and die-roll chewing gum an international sponsor of war in an effort to put pressure on those involved in the war. Headquartered in Chicago, Mondelez is among the largest foreign companies still operating in Russia. The U.S. company is the Russian market leader in chocolate, sweets, and biscuits and is also ranked second in the chewing gum and lollipops categories. In March 2022, Mondelez CEO Dirk van de Put declared the company would be scaling back all non-essential activities in Russia while helping maintain continuity of the food supply during the challenging times ahead. In 2022 alone, the firm's Russian subsidiary paid more than $61 million in taxes to the Russian budget, according to the NCPA. Mondelez has 3 large production facilities in the country employing some 3,200 people. The Ukrainian agency claims that the company continues to promote its products in Russia and import new products to this market and by doing so is indirectly involved in financing the conflict. The Aria manufacturer has been branded an enemy of Ukraine along with Raiffeisen Bank International, Auchan, Metro, Procter & Gamble, Bonduelle, Leroy Merlin, Xiaomi and many other international companies. China willing to contribute to multilateral trading system, trade development, Commerce Minister. China, as a major developing country, is willing to make its due contribution in terms of supporting the multilateral trading system and promoting sustainable and inclusive trade development, Chinese Commerce Minister Wang Wentao said at an Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, APEC, trade ministers meeting held from Thursday to Friday. Supporting the multilateral trading system is an important tradition of APEC, noted Wang. As the reform of the World Trade Organization, WTO, is accelerating, Asia-Pacific economies should take an active part in promoting an early resumption of the dispute settlement mechanism, he added. The economies should strive to complete negotiations on investment facilitation as soon as possible, substantively conclude negotiations on e-commerce within this year, and promote such initiatives as the prevention and control of plastic pollution, he said. Meanwhile, economies in the Asia-Pacific region should strengthen cooperation and focus on areas of common concern and a high degree of consensus among members, pushing for practical outcomes at the 13th Ministerial Conference of the WTO, Wang said. The Asia-Pacific region has always been the most dynamic, promising, and resilient in the global economy, but it also faces interference and challenges in its economic and trade development, Wang noted. China calls on APEC economies to continue to uphold open regionalism, adhere to the main channel status of the free trade area of the Asia-Pacific, unswervingly advance regional economic integration, and further deepen trade and investment cooperation, said Wang, adding that the opportunities and dividends brought by the integrated development of regional industrial and supply chains should be shared. The economies should also give full play to the role of green and low-carbon development and digital economy as engines for sustainable and inclusive growth. Actively carry out policy exchanges and coordination. Technical assistance and capacity building. Promote industrial cooperation and infrastructure investment, help developing and least developed economies better integrate into the development process, and help enterprises, especially the small and medium-sized ones, share development opportunities, he added. On the sidelines of the APEC Trade Ministers meeting, Wang also attended the ministerial meeting between China and Digital Economy Partnership Agreement members, and met with WTO Director General Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala and ministers of the United States, Japan, South Korea, Australia, and other economies, exchanging views on bilateral and multilateral economic and trade issues. The 2023 APEC ministers responsible for trade statement of the chair was issued during the meeting. EU freezes $26 billion in private assets of sanctioned Russians since February 2022, reports. The total value of Russian private assets frozen in the European Union under sanctions over the Russian special operation in Ukraine has reached €24.1 billion, $25.9 billion, German newspaper reported on Saturday, citing European Commission data. The value of frozen Russian private assets under sanctions increased from €18.9 billion in December to €24.1 billion in late May, the newspaper said. As many as 1,473 individuals and 205 firms from Russia have been sanctioned by the EU, German media added. After the start of Russia's military operation in Ukraine on February 24, 2022, Western countries have imposed comprehensive sanctions against Russia, including the freezing of nearly half of the country's foreign currency reserves, amounting to about $300 billion. The European Union alone has frozen assets of Russian entities and individuals worth dozens of billions of dollars under 10 packages of sanctions. China pushes multilateral trade agenda at 29th APEC trade ministers meet. China has reiterated its dedication and support toward building a multilateral trade system as well as sustainable and inclusive trade development at the 29th Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, APEC, trade ministers meeting that was held in Detroit, U.S. on May 25 and 26. Chinese Commerce Minister Wang Wentao, who led a delegation at the meeting, urged APEC economies to enhance open regionalism, maintain the pivotal role of the Asia-Pacific Free Trade Area, and relentlessly push forward regional economic integration. Highlighting the essential role of green and low-carbon development as well as the digital economy, Wang endorsed policy exchanges and coordination, technical assistance, and capacity building to drive sustainable growth. He emphasized the need for industrial cooperation and infrastructure investment to assist developing economies and small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, seize development opportunities. Additionally, Wang held a meeting with World Trade Organization, WTO, Director General Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala and discussed the WTO Fisheries Subsidies Agreement and the preparations for the 13th Ministerial Conference, MC13. Wang repeated China's dedication toward genuine multilateralism and WTO reforms and said China was committed to substantial contributions to the success of the MC13. At the meeting, Okonjo-Iweala praised China's positive and constructive role within the WTO and expressed her expectation for China's continued leadership. Yellen, U.S. has until at least June 5 to hammer out debt ceiling deal before defaulting. U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen revealed on Friday that lawmakers have a little over a week to hash out a debt ceiling deal before the federal agency runs out of funds and begins to default on financial obligations. Based on the most recent available data, we now estimate that the Treasury will have insufficient resources to satisfy the government's obligations if Congress has not raised or suspended the debt limit by June 5, Yellen said in a letter to House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, RCA. Yellen explained that the federal government has a number of large payments coming up and the Treasury has already used some of its last remaining extraordinary measures to turn up funds to pay those bills. Or projected resources would be inadequate to satisfy all of these obligations, she said. We have learned from past debt limit impasses that waiting until the last minute to suspend or increase the debt limit can cause serious harm to business and consumer confidence, raise short-term borrowing costs for taxpayers, and negatively impact the credit rating of the United States, Yellen continued. In fact, we have already seen Treasury's borrowing costs increase substantially for securities maturing in early June. If Congress fails to increase the debt limit, it would cause severe hardship to American families, harm our global leadership position, and raise questions about our ability to defend our national security interests. I continue to urge Congress to protect the full faith and credit of the United States by acting as soon as possible, Yellen said. The Treasury chief previously gave lawmakers a deadline of June 1 by which to hammer out a deal to lift the debt ceiling. Her warning comes just hours after economists at Goldman Sachs, the world's second-largest bank, announced their conclusion that the federal government only has enough money to pay its bills until June 9. If the debt ceiling is not raised by then and new funds appropriated, the coffers will run dry and the U.S. will default on its debt. The debt ceiling was reached in January, but the Republican-controlled House, led by McCarthy, declined to raise the ceiling, sensing an opportunity to force Democrats into agreeing to budget cuts they would otherwise reject. U.S. President Joe Biden has for months refused to sign any bill that ties budget cuts to raising the debt ceiling, and McCarthy has similarly refused to hand him a bill without them. Still, talks have continued, with U.S. media reporting Friday that Biden and McCarthy were closing in on a deal. But several key issues remained outstanding, including scaling back plans to hire more Internal Revenue Service, IRS, auditors, halting non-defense discretionary spending from increasing beyond their 2023 levels, and whether or not the deal would raise the debt ceiling for 1 year or 2. If the U.S. defaults on its debt, it is likely to seriously damage its credit rating. As Yellen noted, the U.S. credit rating was downgraded in 2011, despite narrowly avoiding a default, because lawmakers waited within hours to agree to a deal. Despite the dangers, at an Article 4 consultation on Friday with International Monetary Fund, IMF, Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva, Yellen noted the resilience of the U.S. economy in the face of global headwinds. U.S. credit rating downgraded. China's leading rating service pointed to the debt ceiling crisis as the main reason for the decision. China Shenzhen International Credit Rating, CCXI, slashed its sovereign credit score for the U.S. by one notch earlier this week, becoming the first among top rating firms to make the move. The leading Chinese agency, a joint venture between Beijing's Hixiong Information Management Consulting and U.S. ratings giant Moody's, lowered the U.S. to AAG Plus from AAAG, having placed it on review for a further downgrade, according to a statement released on Thursday. The intensification of political divisions between the two parties in the United States has increased the difficulty of resolving the debt ceiling issue, the statement reads. Even if a consensus is reached, the brinkmanship would pose uncertainty to the U.S. government's policy path and dampen economic confidence, which could trigger further volatility in the U.S. politics and economy, the agency added. According to CCXI, U.S. debt sustainability is currently being seriously challenged, with the highest level of borrowing among the previously AA-graded nations, while the issue is being complicated by hawkish policies of the U.S. Federal Reserve. The regulator has hiked the key interest rate several times over the past few months, raising the risk of asset depreciation on the balance sheets of many financial institutions. The credit rating agency Fitch previously put the U.S. on watch for a potential downgrade, having warned that the nation could soon lose its AAA score due to an inability to pay its bills, within a matter of days. Meanwhile, Moody's said a mid-June interest payment on treasuries will be critical for maintaining its top AAA grade. Republicans and Democrats have struggled to reach an agreement to increase the debt ceiling for weeks, prompting warnings from Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen that the U.S. is highly likely to default if Congress does not act soon. The move would be a first in American history, as the government has never defaulted on its debt, which has swelled to more than $31 trillion. Late on Friday, Yellen extended the deadline for a potentially devastating default, saying the government has just a few more days to argue over the debt ceiling before it runs out of cash. Saudi Arabia buying up millions of barrels of Russian diesel, data. Meanwhile, supplies of the fuel from Riyadh are being sent to the EU. Saudi Arabia imported 174,000 barrels of diesel and gas a day from Russia in April, Bloomberg reported earlier this week, citing data from analytics firm Kepler. The figure comes in contrast to 137,700 barrels per day recorded in the previous month. Imports kept rising in May, and amounted to 191,200 barrels a day in the first 2 weeks of the month alone, marking a record high since 2017. At the same time, the Middle East nation emerged as the European Union's #1 supplier, leapfrogging Russia since February. The kingdom, however, is reportedly not reselling the diesel and gas that it receives from Russia, as such a move would be considered a breach of sanctions imposed by the bloc on Moscow over its military operation in Ukraine. According to sources familiar with the matter who spoke to Bloomberg, the latest upsurge in production at the kingdom's refineries was responsible for the increase in imports to the EU. The unnamed sources also told the news agency that additional exported fuels, which came from different parts of the country, were made to different specifications and were often subject to long-term supply commitments. The data tracked by Kepler also shows that Saudi Arabia outpaced the US to become the world's second biggest exporter of diesel and gasoil last month. Nearly 35% of the kingdom's overall April exports were reportedly shipped to EU member states and the UK. Meanwhile, sanctions hit Russia remains the #1 seller of the fuel. US clothing giant expanding in Russia, media. Guess is consolidating its business in the country, Commerçant reports. American fashion brand Guess has reacquired its stake from a Russian partner in what experts have described as an unusual deal for the fashion market in the sanctioned country, Commerçant reported on Thursday. The clothing manufacturer and retailer reportedly bought back its 30% share from local partner Vyacheslav Shikulov for €8 million, $8.5 million, and has consolidated 100% of its Russian business after the deal was approved by the U.S. Treasury Department. At the end of 2015, the parties signed a put-option agreement which provided Shikulov with the right to sell his 30% stake in local business and obliged the American company to buy out his share by December 31, 2025. Shikulov exercised the option in November 2022, and Guess applied for permission to conduct a buyback to the Office of Foreign Assets Control of the U.S. Department of the Treasury, OFAC. The move by the U.S. clothing giant is atypical for the current market environment as the vast majority of Western companies exiting Russia are seeking to sell their assets to local investors, industry experts pointed out. The deal could reflect the retailer's concerns over continuing its Russian operations, they added. In 2022, Guess's revenue in Russia increased by 24% to 4 billion rubles, $49.9 million, data showed. Numerous foreign brands and businesses have left Russia over the past year following increasing pressure from their governments, with many suffering major losses on exiting the country. Earlier in May, Japanese casual wear retailer Uniqlo decided to sell most of its stores in Russia after suffering multi-million-dollar losses. Last year, Swedish clothing brand H&M lost some $363 million, while Spanish clothing conglomerate Inditex, the owner of brands such as Zara, Bershka, and Massimo Dutti, faced about $300 million in losses. French sporting goods retailer Decathlon lost around $140 million, while luxury Italian retailer Moncler and French counterpart Hermes jointly lost around $200 million. UK to retain Russian assets until Kiev is compensated, Guardian. Moscow has described the seizures as theft and a violation of international law. British officials have confirmed that Russian state assets will not be returned even after the conflict in Ukraine is over, but only when Moscow pays reparations to Kiev, The Guardian reported on Friday. According to Russian estimates, more than $300 billion of the country's foreign currency reserves have been frozen due to Western sanctions. Additionally, billions more worth of assets belonging to Russian citizens and businesses have been seized. Assets and reserves belonging to the Russian state, valued at £26 billion, $32.1 billion, are currently being held in the UK, according to the Bank of Russia. British MPs and Ukrainian officials have been pressing for the frozen funds to be handed over to Kiev for reconstruction efforts. UK Foreign Secretary James cleverly insisted last week that Russia's sovereign assets should remain immobilized until the nation agreed to pay compensation to Ukraine, according to the outlet. The EU and its allies have been looking into methods of confiscating Russian assets, with the Council of Europe last week establishing a digital register of damage for Ukraine, a move that has been described as the first step towards creating an international compensation mechanism. The register will be based in The Hague and will serve as evidence and claims information on damage, loss, or injury caused to individuals, and the Ukrainian state. Earlier, the Financial Times reported that EU officials were examining how they might send Kiev profits generated from some €196.6 billion, $211.1 billion, in Russian assets held at Euroclear. The Russian funds at the world's largest settlement house have generated hundreds of millions of euros in interest over the past year. However, Western officials are still facing legal challenges over the feasibility of seizing Russian money. According to Professor of Public International Law at the University of Oxford, Antonios Zanakopoulos, Russian assets are protected by sovereign immunity as an embodiment of the state. Therefore, confiscating these funds would be in breach of international law. Moscow has called Western attempts to transfer the seized assets to Ukraine barbarism and theft, warning that Russia will respond in kind if necessary. Data leak by disgruntled employee lands Tesla in hot water. The electric car maker is under fresh scrutiny over a huge data breach and renewed concern over its technical issues. A whistleblower working at Tesla has leaked 100 gigabytes of sensitive data detailing technical faults with the company's vehicles and also divulging a mass of personal data on staff and clients, newspaper Handelsblatt has reported, dubbing the leak the Tesla files. A report under the title "My Autopilot Almost Killed Me" was published online by the outlet on Thursday. It states that huge amounts of internal information have escaped from the company and that this leaked information suggests that Tesla's problems with its autopilot function could be even bigger than previously thought. The Tesla files reportedly contain thousands of complaints made between 2015 and 2022 by customers from across the US, Europe and Asia, which raise serious concerns about the safety of Tesla's full self-driving, FSD, feature. Among the reported issues are self-acceleration and braking problems, with some describing incidents where cars suddenly brake or accelerate abruptly. According to Handelsblatt, while some drivers safely regained control of their car, others ended up in a ditch, hit walls, or crashed into oncoming vehicles. Tesla also likes to keep its vehicles' data under wraps and doesn't share written reports about incidents with customers, Handelsblatt reports, citing the leaked files. The Elon Musk firm is facing numerous lawsuits over its driver assistance systems and is under investigation by the U.S. Road Transportation Agency NHTSA, as well as descriptions of technical issues. Handelsblatt also said customers' and employees' private details could be found in abundance in the leaked data set. The documents reportedly contain more than 100,000 names of former and current employees, and included the social security number of CEO Elon Musk, along with employees' private emails, phone numbers, and salaries, as well as the bank details of customers and secret information from production. Handelsblatt says Tesla has failed to adequately protect sensitive and personal data. It cites internal guidelines under which information such as passport and social security numbers may only be shared with password protection and with access granted only to certain employees. However, according to the outlet, the leaked files suggest that Tesla is not implementing these regulations. The data breach would violate the EU General Data Protection Regulation and has drawn the attention of German and Dutch authorities. The Data Protection Supervisory Authority in the Netherlands, home to Tesla's European headquarters, has been informed of the incident, and authorities in the German state of Brandenburg, where Tesla's Gigafactory is located, have serious indications of possible data protection violations, the newspaper wrote. A lawyer for Tesla told Handelsblatt that a disgruntled former employee had abused his access as a service technician to get information and added that the company would take the ex-employee to court. According to Reuters, Tesla was not immediately available for comment on the report.